Hello everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. I hope you're well today. Today we're going to be exhaustively, yes, investigating the INFJ type 6. And through the discussion of the INFJ type 6, I think there'll be insights about the other types, any types of INFJs. So if you're interested in the deepest investigation of the INFJ 6, stick around for this video. I might do a little bit of rambling here and there because I want to go deep, okay? So bear with me because we will be going deep. Now, before I move on, just remember that I've got those two books out in the last year or so. My novel, The Infinite Castle. If you want to support a fellow INFJ, my fictional work, a lot of INFJs represented in the fictional account, and then the essential text on the INFJ personality, how it is like to be an INFJ, the ecstatic soul. Both available at the links down below. Both less than $10, available in all your countries through Amazon, and so on and so forth. So, I said in my introduction that I wanted to go deep with this video because I feel like there is a lot of potential for us to get to a better understanding of what it is to be an INFJ, what it is to be an INFJ of a certain type, of a certain Enneagram type, by focusing our efforts on the type 6. Now, the reason why I want to focus on type 6 is partly because I think that this is the most common INFJ type, although it is not recognized to be that. Partly because there was a lot of interest expressed through the comments in the previous video I made on why I believe that a lot of INFJs have the wrong Enneagram type, that the Enneagram type they identify with is likely not their correct one. Now, in the previous video I made, which was close to 20 minutes, I didn't really get the chance to delve into the INFJ 6 in as much detail as I wanted to. But I did give some leads. There was one particular sentence I said which seemed to strike a lot of people. It seems to be the main takeaway that people got from the video, and that is a good thing because I wanted it to be one of the main takeaways. It's an easy kind of thing to remember. In opposition to the INFJ 4 or the type 4 in general, the type 6 has a strong, they have in common, both types have in common that they are searching for something that's deeply connected to their identity. However, there's a difference in the search, a very crucial, fundamental difference in the search. The INFJ 4, like all type 4s, are seeking after the best ways to express their identity. The identity of the INFJ 4 is not a problem for them. It is not the source of their troubles. Okay? What is a problem for them? What is the source of their troubles? What they have to, as a task, if you like, to negotiate and to work through is to ensure that they can live their life in accordance with that sense of identity. That they can live their life in such a way that they can express that sense of identity in a way that is authentic to the identity. Which is why authentic living, authentic life, authenticity, as we often see in the existential literature, in existentialism, authenticity is a very strong theme, is a crucial parameter in the life of an INFJ 4 and in the life of a type 4 in general. Writing books is one way of expressing that authenticity, but it doesn't have to be about writing books. It can be about, like I said, living your life in keeping, in a way that doesn't jar too much, despite the requirements of the workplace, despite all the requirements that life imposes on us, to live your life in a way that is respectful and authentic to your sense of self. Now, I used to identify with that a lot. And in fact, I did identify as an INFJ 4 with the 5 wing for quite a long time, probably for the longest time. But now let's compare this again to the INFJ 6. The INFJ 6 also sees identity as a task. They are going to be very preoccupied with questions that have to do with identity. And you might even go so far as to say that a lot of INFJ 6s will resonate with questions of authenticity too. Now that leads to a high likelihood of mixing up the types, right? Identity, authenticity, both INFJs, INFJ 4, INFJ 6, both relate to it. So what tells them apart? Well, the thing is that the authenticity that the INFJ 6 is looking for is not the authenticity of living a life according to their sense of identity, their sense of self. They're looking for their authentic self, full stop. So I think that here you have to notice the difference. The INFJ 4 is not looking for their authentic self. They are looking for a life that is in accordance with their authentic self. In other words, the authenticity of the self for the 4 and the INFJ 4 is never the problem. It's never called into question. What's called into question is, how am I going to be able to not be inauthentic in my life, in my choices, to that essence? So if I wanted to take a very crude but dramatic example, if the INFJ 4 in their very essence really identify as an artist of some sort, that's a broad term, but it applies to a lot of possible different ways of leading your life. Well, if they end up working in business, that is going to jar a lot, because there are ways to be creative and artistic in the world of business, but there's also lots of ways in which you can't be. And so there's going to be a disconnect, and that's going to be a problem for the INFJ 4. But it's because the occupation that they're engaged in could be accountancy, could be sports as well. It's just not living up to the expectations of authenticity that are nourished by the sense of self that is artistic. In the case of the INFJ 6, it's not really the issue. Like, the INFJ 6 is likely to be open to any kind of job at first because they're trying to figure out what their authentic self is. It's only really afterwards that they kind of try to work through, okay, that didn't really suit me, maybe I should try this other thing. Oh, it didn't actually really suit me either, so maybe I should try that third thing. Meanwhile, they're not searching primarily for whatever is suiting their authentic self. They're looking for their authentic self. And the INFJ 6 is constantly looking for their authentic self. It's a search for the self rather than the search for the best expression of the self. The self in the INFJ 6 is not taken for granted. The certainty, the identity of the self is not taken for granted in the INFJ 6. Now that's the major difference, and as you can see, it's a huge difference. And yet, the sentence semantically look very close, right? The distinction between living an authentic life, a life that is authentic to your sense of self, and finding your authentic self. Different things, looks very similar, probably explains a lot of the mistypings in the community between the INFJ 4 and the INFJ 6. I'm choosing to focus on the distinction between these two types in this video. I could have picked the INFJ 5, I could have picked the INFJ 2, but I think the 4 and the 6 are really the crux of the matter when it comes to mistyping. It's probably interesting to try and understand a bit better why the very identity of the INFJ 6 is a problem for them. Why can't they take it for granted? It's partly something that was expressed in the comments to my previous video. There's a certain sense of incompleteness in the INFJ 6. There's a sense in which their essence, if you like, is liquid. It can sort of fit anywhere. You can imagine water, depending on the kind of mold you have, water can you pour water into this mold, depending on what the shape of it, it can embrace a cross-like pattern. It can embrace a square-like pattern. It can embrace a circular pattern. It can embrace a pattern that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, because water just can flow in. So there's something very shape-shifty about that kind of identity. Now, that is not at all like the identity of the INFJ 4. The identity of the INFJ 4 is not like water. It's solid. Okay? The means by which they'll try to express it might be through all sorts of different means, but the identity is solid. The identity of the 6 is not solid. And the mold that I'm talking about is what serves to give form to the essentially water-like identity of the 6. Now, what's distinctive about this mold is, you'll notice it's external. It's external to the 6 itself. They have to seize a mold and try to give some sort of identity, and then try to look at it and be like, okay, how do I feel about this? Am I happy to sort of settle for this or not? It's external, which means that the 6 is always going to be trying to work out their sense of identity by constant interaction with the outside world. They're going to be looking for externalities that they can seize on to define their identity, or, which amounts to the same thing but is the converse, they will define themselves by rejecting. But you see that in a lot of 6s, and not necessarily counterphobic 6s. They will see something well known and reject it, because the way of rejecting it is a further step toward finding who they are. Among intellectual 6s, and there are a lot of INFJ 6s that are intellectuals, because it's fundamentally a head type, so especially 6 with a 5 wing, which would be by far the more common type of INFJ, subtype of INFJ 6. What you'll see, and then again the distinction with the 4 and even with the 5 is I think is edifying. Suppose you're talented philosophically, and you're an INFJ 6, and then you have another talented INFJ 4 that's philosophically interested and invested. Very different approaches. INFJ 4 will have a clear idea of what they want to do, the system they have in mind, and they'll try to develop it straight away. And they'll tend to carry it through to the end and then see what people say about it. They'll have a very strong confidence in their idea and try to develop it. The 5 has similarities in this respect. The 6 is very different. They're not confident in their idea. Basically, they can convince themselves that they're confident in their initial idea, but that they're not, because there's this constant dependence on what the outside world is saying, so that they can use it as an echo to define themselves further, including defining their own thoughts. So what the 6, the philosophically talented 6 will typically do, first they'll start reading everything on the topic. They'll start reading everything, and they'll feel a strong need to identify what's already out there in the literature, that they can sort of say, okay, am I agreeing with this? Am I rejecting this? They'll feel comfortable with developing their ideas if they have a kind of foil in the literature that they can reject. So they take, that's also, and you see that's where the link with tradition enters into the picture. Because sometimes you hear, well, the 6s care about tradition. At least for the INFJ 6, the way in which tradition enters into the picture is because they need to have tradition as a backdrop against which to assert themselves. Now, it can be to embrace tradition, in which maybe they're not particularly reflective 6s, but if they're reflective and maybe even rebellious 6s, or philosophically rebellious 6s, they'll need the tradition just as much to reject it. Whereas a 4 won't care about the tradition, they'll just do their thing. You understand the difference? The 6 needs to engage with what's been done, needs to engage with what's out there, because they cannot really come up or trust that what they come up with all on their own has any solidity, because it doesn't. It's like water. So you'll notice the 6 being very, very careful and skeptical. They'll progress carefully. They'll look at a particular system and reject it, or find flaws in it and say, okay, maybe I can add something there. And progressively, they'll manage to develop their ideas. They'll constantly be doubting them and rejecting them. They'll find it difficult to complete a system because, again, it's not just that they start doubting their system, it's that their very essence is to doubt. Their very essence is to doubt because their essence is not solid. It's liquid. Part of this is also why the 6 tends to feel like the environment is hostile. We often hear that the 6 has to, constantly worry about their security. If you take a shallow understanding of security, you think, okay, like lots of money in the bank account, conservative about their finances, making sure they have a stable job and everything. But what's interesting is to try to understand the underlying psychology behind this. What is it about the environment that the 6 considers to be hostile, in a sense, that they need to be prepared against, that they need to troubleshoot against? Because if the 6s are seen as good troubleshooters, it's because they've come to have a very good understanding of their environment. Maybe a 4 would be just as good a troubleshooter if they cared, but they don't care as much about the external environment because they have a solid sense of self. They can always retreat to that sense of self. The 6 considers the environment to be dangerous because the 6 gives a lot of power to the environment to define them in the first place. So the environment is powerful, much more fundamentally than it is dangerous. One of the possibilities that the environment is very reassuring, very protective, because it has the power to be. But if the 6 perceive the environment in a more negative light, then instantly it becomes dangerous. But fundamentally, it's not the danger in the environment that you have to register when you're thinking about the 6. It's the power that is given to the environment. The power is given to the environment because the 6 doesn't struggle to have a strong sense of their inner self, of their identity, without the echo provided by the environment. That's why the environment has a lot of power, and where it's a lot less likely to have power in the case of someone who by essence has a stronger sense of self, has a sense of self that is already established, and where the problematic is seen much more as finding a way to express that sense of self and respect and act in accordance with that sense of self. With the 6, it's very different, and it all comes down to this sense of a fluid identity that seems to be possibly embracing lots of different things, but for the very same reason, to become skeptical, because the 6 always keeps a strong, deep-seated notion that this is not really who they are. They know it, but it might be working out temporarily. Very, very connected to why it's hard for a 6 to complete a system. It's because they'll be constantly doubting whether that is really expressing who they are. But who they are is not decided in the first place, so you end up in a kind of circle. So I think that I've been trying to really emphasize what distinguishes an INFJ 6 from an INFJ 4. And I'm satisfied that I've talked enough about the topic for now. I'm really curious to hear what you're going to say in the comments. Please engage with me like you did. It was super useful last time. And hopefully we've explored the topic in some depths and we can have some further insights about whether anyone resonates with the 6 or more with the 4 still. And, I think that there's probably more to discuss yet in more videos. So until then, don't forget about my books and about my Patreon too. It would be absolutely great if you wanted to support me. And I'll see you next week. Ciao, ciao.